Doc, can you give us any update on the progress of Tiles to start?
Yeah, I think we're reasonably bullish on Talesy. Obviously, we haven't done a lot of training yet, but the thought is that he probably will get up, so that'll be good.
What was the sort of feeling around the rooms afterwards when he obviously came off during the game but finished it? What was the
Yeah, so I think any time they can go back on, you obviously are buoyed by that. Yeah, we'll see how he pulls up, but at this stage we're hopeful.
Is there any indication on what part of the foot is troubling him, or is it the same one he carried earlier in the year?
I couldn't tell you, mate. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's his foot. Yeah.
So he did say in a post-game interview that it was the same one he's carried since, or he's had some trouble with it during the season. Like, obviously you get scans today, but do you try and give him a week off just to get that settled down?
Before we answer that,
Matt,
just
you
like jump back in behind the mics, mate. That's should have been good for me.
Doc, given he's sort of carried that for most of the season, to give it a week off just so he settles down, so he's good for the rest of the year?
If he's right, we'll pick him and he'll play.
Yeah.
How's Richie doing?
Yeah, so Dougie's probably less likely. He's ankle and didn't finish out the game, so at this stage he's probably unlikely.
We're talking McGovern type ankle or less severe?
I'm not too sure, to be honest, mate, but I know that he's probably doubtful this week. Yeah, so I can't give you the long-term prognosis, but the short-term is that on this 6-day turn he won't play. Probably won't play.
Back-to-back 6-day breaks. How difficult is that just to back up?
Yeah, management-wise, well, obviously it just reduces your training minutes is basically all. The players generally come up pretty well on 6 days, but it just means that you don't get a lot of training volume into them. So you probably wouldn't want to have 4 in a row, but 2 in a row is pretty manageable.
Doc, we saw a lot of boost towards Tex Walker. He seems to copy the brunt of it at the moment. How does he sort of feel at the moment?
Yeah, he's a pretty buoyant character. Obviously we want to be playing better collectively and individually, but no, he's a right man.
Doc, can you talk us through the half-time huddle out on the ground? Have you seen the vision of the boys? It looked like they were trying to emulate a bit of Richmond and keep it pretty light-hearted.
Yeah, I can't enlighten you too much, mate, other than obviously, you can keep your group in a positive headspace. It's not a terrible thing to do, but no, I can't elaborate much on that one for you. You'll have to ask the players, mate. No, player-driven, so not.
But you don't know what was said? Or
no, I don't. No.
What was the fallout from the game? I mean, competitive for 3 quarters, but obviously fell away in that final term.
Yeah, well, I think obviously, credit to the opposition. They're the standard at the moment, and I guess the fallout was that as a game that we lost, we felt there was effort, but ultimately we weren't able to sustain it for long enough to get the result. And I guess the learning is that that's the level, and until we reach that level, we're not going to be in the space that we want to be. So we've got to get there as quickly as possible.
And does it also hurt with guys coming back from injury? They probably haven't got that conditioning. Does that hurt a bit as well, do you think?
I think we had fit players out there that were capable of performing. The blokes that had come back had done a really good, solid conditioning block. So no, I don't factor that in.
As a rough coach, how have you seen Source's workload in his effort this season? Obviously, he's had niggles with his back. But
I think. I think he's had better seasons, and he'd acknowledge that. But I think over the last probably 3 weeks, he's started to return to some of his better form. So yeah, that's probably a broad summation. He'd want to be playing slightly better, but I think he's tracking in the right direction.
Yeah, like a body thing holding him back, do you think, or just general form? Or?
No, probably a little bit like the team. A little bit of both. We've probably had we've had enough fit players out there to perform strongly, but we haven't been able to do it. So a combination.
Yeah, Riley's out for the year with his shoulder.
He is done. Yeah.
Are you confident that he'll be up and about for next year if Source needs help or whatever, or do you think that the club has?
Riley O'Brien. Yeah, no, his part of the rationale. He played with a minor shoulder for about 3 or 4 weeks, in the hope that he'd be able to get it better. But ultimately, the best option was surgery, and part of the thinking there was if we pushed it any longer, then it was going to compromise his next pre-season. So at this stage, he'll be back fully ready to go for the pre-season, and he had a great pre-season this year, really strong performance, and was playing pretty well in the SANFL. But ultimately, it's hard to do so with one shoulder.
You guys are very bullish about him being able to help Source next year.
Yeah, no, really happy with his progression. He's played a couple of games and quite possibly could have played more, but this season hasn't panned out for him well because of the injury.
Did you get a chance to watch the Sandford game Saturday?
I didn't get to it live. I've seen it on tape. Yeah.
Okay. So how did Rory Atkins and Sam Gibson look in that game?
Yeah, so they got through the game. I think most importantly for Sam, it was his first game back, and I was talking to his first game at that second tier level for about 7 years. So he got through the game, played pretty well. Enjoyed being out there playing footy again. So that was the main thing. Yeah, and the other guys, obviously it's challenging at the moment. The SANFL team are having trouble with a number of players available. Ultimately, is making it challenging for them. But the guys that are in those circumstances are doing everything they possibly can, both within those games and then also on the track to put their name forward for selection.
Well, Rory Atkins a couple of weeks now at the sample.
Yep.
Have you done enough to come back to the senior side?
Yeah, so that will be a discussion for match committee during the week. I mean, obviously the challenge of the SANFL draw at the moment, with conflicting with the AFL draw, is that those guys have had really short breaks. But Geelong's in the same circumstance. There's actually a shorter break. They've got about a 4-day break between their VFL and their AFL side. So that's just something we've got to manage. It probably is a slight factor at selection, but ultimately, if their form's good enough, we'll pick them.
I think Geelong managed the minutes of a couple of guys that might have been played
Yep.
game stuff. Were you able to do the same with your sample guys, or not able to give
We're-
them allowed 3 on the bench?
Yeah, and the other change in the SANFL is that the rotations are capped over here, and not the case in the VFL. So that also makes the management of your players more difficult in the SANFL. So that's something we just have to contend with.
Obviously, 7 and 8, couple of games outside the 8, it's almost last chance to lose. You just got to win.
Yeah, so we've got to win. We've got to clearly win. Probably minimum of 6 games going forward. I'm not a mathematician, but you start to have to factor those things in. Ultimately, we've just got to get back to playing a level of football, regardless of the numbers. We've got to play a style of footy and a level of intensity that warrants finals. And if we can't do that, then it's irrelevant anyway. So the sooner we get back to that, the better it'll be.
Why do you think that's been lacking, Doc? Why haven't you been able to produce that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, too. Clearly that's the challenge for the group this year. We haven't been able to. We've played it at the level for games, for periods of games, but ultimately consistently across the year, we haven't been at that level. So that's what we're all striving towards. Coaches, players, administrators. We're looking for those answers, and we're tailoring our training to try and replicate that so that we can produce it on game day.
Players are pretty clever. They know what they have to do to make the finals and go even further. So how much does this week potentially change, given that it is really cutthroat?
Doesn't change much, mate. To be honest, you do project forward, but very quickly you narrow your focus back to this week, because that's all you can control. And as I said, it's really about getting back to playing the way that we want to play.
What are you focusing on this week?
Yeah, as always, it'll end up being a contest game. Geelong's numbers in the contest are outstanding, so we have to match that. In fact, we have to better that. It starts with the contest. Can we bring a level of pressure? And if we reflect on last week's game, Richmond's pressure probably was at a higher level than ours. So they're fairly basic footy things, but it's pretty much the foundation of your performance. So we'll start with that, I reckon.
There's been a lot of noise about Rory Sloane's future. How confident are you that he stays at West Lakes next year?
Well, I guess we'll wait and see, but I know he's about as invested an individual as I've had any time dealing with. So I don't think there's any question about his commitment to this footy club. I know that he's been an absolute servant and an absolute warrior for us, and I reckon he'll continue to do that for as long as he's an Adelaide Crows player.
Is there still any heat between Paddy Dangerfield and other boys that playing this week?
Who's that? He's a pretty good player, Dangerfield, but he's an opposition player, so we'll be taking it to him.
You talk about pressure. I mean, you can understand a sort of kick going sideways given the execution sort of stuff, but is pressure more about effort and just the will to get there and put on the tackle and that sort of stuff? So if it's effort, how do you sort of explain Blake's not really trying to put in pressure?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one. Sometimes there's effort component to it. There's also a structural component. You've got to have the number of people in the right areas to bring that heat, and so those can both elements play in. But ultimately, you just got to find a way to get it done.
How do you coach it?
Last couple of guys.
Yeah, so you train it. You train it.
to do it in a way that no other team in the competition can emulate at the moment.
Yeah, well, they're the standard, but ultimately, your only mechanism is training and a little bit about the way you set up the game in terms of number density. But ultimately, yeah, you've got to train at that intensity consistently.